I was about 4 or 5 years old when my parents had just separated. My mom had moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment. I had my own room, but I usually slept in her bed when I stayed over. Our rooms were at the end of a hallway, directly across from each other. The apartment was on the first floor, and it was summer. I remember my mom had the window open behind the headboard of her bed. I woke up in the middle of the night. The room was quiet, but something felt off. I sat up and saw our cat sitting in the doorway of my mom's room, staring into my bedroom. That was odd. He always slept with us. Slowly, he stood up, walked into my room, and meowed softly. I turned to wake my mom. It only took a few seconds for her to stir and ask what was wrong. But when we both looked back toward the doorway, there was a man standing there. He was by my bedroom door, slowly walking out into the hallway. My mom didn't stop to think. She grabbed me, lifted me up, and threw me out the window. We were on the first floor, so it wasn't far to the ground. She climbed out right after me. We screamed for help, and someone called 911. When the police arrived, they didn't find any signs of forced entry. The front door was unlocked, and they figured the man left that way. But my mom swore she'd locked the door that night, with both the deadbolt and the chain. A week later, my mom was cleaning the kitchen. She opened the water heater closet and froze. Inside, there was a notebook. It had names, strange drawings, a pair of gloves, and some gum wrappers. The police came back, but all they could do was speculate. The man hadn't just broken in. He'd been hiding inside the house, waiting for us to fall asleep. The time that scared me the most was when I was about 9 years old. I woke up and found myself with the bedroom curtains drawn back and staring out the window. As I came awake, I noticed a very large and completely hairless man, no hair, eyebrows, etc., staring at me and slowly inching closer to the window and closer to my face. He was looking bewildered, like he wasn't sure what he was seeing. At that moment, I realized what was going on, and I started screaming uncontrollably, frozen in place and peeing down my leg. The man freaked out and screamed, did a tumbling move, and then ran off in a weird zigzag, like he was trying to dodge bullets. My mom woke up and thought I probably had a nightmare. The next morning, we found a screwdriver on the front porch and damage to the door jamb and door handle. I still just about pee my pants when I tell that story, but now it is usually from laughing. I will never forget the look on his face when I started coming to life and screaming, or his high-pitched scream, or his duck and roll and dodging and bobbing all the way down the street. When I was about 11 or 13, I stayed at my nan's house a lot. She had lived there longer than I'd been alive, and it was the first house anyone had ever lived in on that property. Even as a kid, I always had this off feeling at night. My dad had mentioned it too. He said the place just felt strange after dark. The feeling was so bad that when I was younger, I'd often end up sleeping in my nan's bed. But one night, I decided to stay in the spare bedroom upstairs, the one right next to hers. I don't remember if I woke up or if I was already awake, but when I looked to my left, toward the nightstand, I froze. There, standing by the lamp, was my nan. Her eyes were pitch black, completely void. She was smiling, holding the lamp's switch, and the light was off. I couldn't move. This wasn't a dream. I know I was awake. I could feel the covers in my hands, feel my body shaking. I panicked, pulling the blanket over my head, hoping she'd be gone when I looked again. After a few moments, I peeked out. She was still there. Her eyes, that smile. I went back under the covers, trembling. When I finally dared to look again, she was gone, and the lamp was on. I ran into her room, screaming and crying, desperate for comfort. She asked me what was wrong but brushed it off, saying it must have been a bad dream. But I know it wasn't. I was awake. I was moving. Years later, my Nan passed away in May. Before she died, I asked her about that night. Whenever I brought it up, her whole mood would change. She didn't get angry. She never could with me. But she became distant, uneasy. She never believed in ghosts, or at least, she claimed not to. Then one day, I overheard her talking to a neighbor. She mentioned seeing a little boy standing at the top of the stairs when she looked over the banister. It made me wonder if she'd experienced other things in that house, but never told me. And there was something else. When I was much younger, I apparently had night terrors. My Nan told me that one night, I came running into her room from the spare bedroom, screaming. I was trying to jump out the window, shouting, "The man is going to get me." There were no men in that house, no granddad, no uncles, just me and my Nan. I think about that night all the time. I know what I saw. I know it wasn't her. She had cancer and couldn't have moved from my room to hers in a split second and then been sound asleep when I got to her bed. So, what was it? If anyone has an idea, please let me know. I can't stop thinking about it. Last summer, my friends and I decided to camp in the woods behind my house. We'd been there so many times, it felt like our own backyard. We packed some snacks, built a fire, and spent the night laughing and telling stories. Everything was perfect. Until around midnight. That's when we heard it. A rustling sound coming from the trees. At first, we shrugged it off, joking that it was probably a deer or a raccoon. But the noise kept getting closer and heavier, like someone was walking toward us. We grabbed our flashlights and shone them into the woods, but we didn't see anything. The fire flickered, and everything felt eerily quiet. Then, out of nowhere, the sound stopped completely. No rustling, no wind. Even the crickets went silent. And then we heard it. The sharp crack of a branch breaking, just a few feet behind me. I spun around, and my flashlight landed on a figure. A person, tall and still, standing in the dark between the trees. I couldn't see their face, but I could feel them watching us. Panic set in. We grabbed our stuff and bolted, running as fast as we could back to my house. I don't think we stopped until we were inside with the doors locked behind us. The next morning, we went back to check the campsite. My parents didn't believe us, but then we found the footprints, bare feet, walking in circles around where we had been sitting. When I was 17, I was hanging out with two friends who wanted to go smoke weed in the woods. I wasn't really in the mood, so I stayed behind and waited in the car. After a while, I got bored. Sitting there alone didn't feel right, so I decided to go find them. The trailhead split into 4 different paths, and I had no idea which one they'd taken. I picked the biggest one and started walking. It was pitch black. This was before phone flashlights were a thing, so the only light came from the moon filtering through the trees. The whole forest had this strange, heavy feeling, like the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. A few minutes in, the path dipped into a small clearing. That's when I saw it. On the other side of the dip was a bench, barely lit by the moonlight. 2 figures were there, one sitting on the bench and another standing in front of him. At first, I thought it was my friends. Their shapes looked close enough, and who else would be out there? So, I called out, "Hey," and started walking toward them. But as soon as I yelled, both figures turned to face me. They didn't say anything, didn't make a single sound, just turned. And then, the one who'd been sitting stood up. He didn't hesitate. He just sprinted straight at me, full speed, completely silent. I froze. For half a second, I couldn't even process what was happening. My brain was screaming, "Run!" I spun around and bolted, crashing through the woods, tripping over roots and branches, my heart pounding in my ears. I couldn't see anything. The shadows seemed to close in, but I just kept running. Finally, I saw the car. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and locked it. For a moment, I sat there trembling, trying to catch my breath. But then it hit me. Where were my friends? I felt sick. What if something had happened to them? What if that thing got them? A minute later, I saw them emerge from a completely different path. They were laughing, totally fine. When I told them what had happened, they just stared at me, confused. They swore they hadn't seen me, and they hadn't seen anyone else in the woods. To this day, I can't explain it. I don't know who or what that guy was, but sometimes late at night, I can still picture him. The way he turned, the way he sprinted at me, and the chilling silence that followed. Just thinking about it still makes my stomach drop.